starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good day. Welcome to our second, I'll start over again. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our third day of our ALM QC Expert Week. Today's presentation will be on HPALM Web UI, which will be delivered by Bwana McCall, who's our Technical Enablement Manager for HPALM. This session is being recorded, and after the session we will be posting the link in the Quality Center Support Customer Forum where you can access the recording. During the session there is a question tab on the right hand screen where you can type in your questions, and Bwana will answer those questions at the end of his presentation. If you don't have time to submit questions or can't come up with questions, you can always submit your questions in the Quality Center Support Customer Forum at any time. Also looking for feedback or how we can make this day or week or presentations better. We're always looking for feedback, so if you can post that would also be appreciated. So we're going to get started, and Bwana, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks for the introduction. Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming from. We'll be discussing HPALM Web UI, and the focus of this particular session will be on requirements and defects and those particular modules within the ALM Web UI. We're going to be focusing on this new feature of ALM 12, and it is a brand new initiative with the product. It's a new way of looking at the same information we've been exposed to in the past. Now, in our previous session, I encourage you to go watch the recording if you have access to watch the differences between the ALM desktop client and a web client. The desktop client is the traditional ALM UI that you're used to from ALM 11, and this particular client is called the web client, and it is a thin client. And the purpose of this client is to serve multiple individuals on whatever browser they wish to use. So this could be Mac OS X, this could be Unix, this could be Linux, this could be Microsoft Windows, whatever flavor or OS and browsers. The web client offers a wider range of support. Now it provides the same information from an overview perspective that the thick client offers. Now we're going to be focusing on requirements and defects, and these are the main two modules which are exposed in the ALM web client. So this is one of the problems that this solves. A lot of environments, development environments, software development environments have different requirements in terms of operating systems and web browsers and things that the business analyst or the software developer or the tester may be using. In the past, our ALM 11 products and before that were Internet Explorer only products. And this served as sort of a hurdle for some of these individuals who had to have special installations of Windows, or maybe had to go to a specific virtual machine in order to load up Internet Explorer to bring up the ALM Quality Center UI. Now with the ALM Web UI, they can do so from their native environment. It provides the following new features, and these are all very rich features. HTML5 JavaScript support. Once you use the HPALM Web UI, you'll see that the new UI is fast, it is robust, and it is easy on the eyes. It works in Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Safari. These are four major browsers that are used by a wealth of software environments. It is now available for Mac and Windows 8 as well. And we also have a new traceability view within this that we're going to be briefly discussing, and it allows you to see the traceability between entities in a different light. That's one of the user stories and one of the success stories of ALM, is to not only build those assets and entities and provide traceability links between them, but to be able to see those traceability links and act accordingly is very important as well. So this is the splash screen you're presented with when you launch the ALM web client. It is a very simple home screen gives you 3 major links in the middle. The first being new features. You can check out the cool new features, getting started, becoming familiar with new design and new capabilities, and a step-by-step of how to make best use of HPALM in your daily work. At the top is our masthead, and from here you can browse through the different modules. You see at the top left, we have a home menu that you click the drop down, and there's home, requirements, and defects. And from those links, you can access those particular modules. Along the masthead, we have our project that we're currently logged into, for which we can change, as well as the current user that is logged in, a help link, a cog link for those administrators that need to customize this particular project, and a logout link so that you can change or just log out of the ALM web client. So this is what you're presented with when you first hit the web client from the link. So let's first focus on requirements. And again, we're going to be talking about requirements and defects. Requirements will be a focal point for multiple roles in the organization. And while we can talk about all the different processes and procedures surrounding ALM and who can look at requirements and who can handle requirements and a whole requirements management primer, if you will, we're going to be focusing on the features that ALM Web UI provides individuals in their teams to manage, view, and author requirements. So once you select the requirements link from the top left, this is what you'll be presented with. This is a traditional hierarchy view of a requirements tree on the left side. And when you select an entity on the left side, you'll see details on the right. Now, as you can probably notice right off the bat, this looks very, very different from what ALM has traditionally shown. The ALM Web UI, with its HTML5 and JavaScript support that it has, gives us this information that we've seen in the traditional client in a much more lighter format, not only from a brightness and color standpoint, but from a weight standpoint. Because we talk about thick clients and thin clients all the time. If you're not familiar with that terminology, a thick client is a feature-rich application within the browser that can, may need some modules and some components installed to get going, much like our desktop client. Whereas a thin client requires little to no download of modules or customized components, but makes use of the existing technology within the web browser, such as HTML5 and JavaScript. So what we see here is what you'll typically see when you first go into a module. And we're going to explain some of these elements of this interface as we go through this webinar. Some of the enhancements that we have provided with this are, we have a lightweight web user experience. I've just talked about that. We also have some things with workflows, with validation. We're going to talk about business rules a little bit later. And if you're familiar with the concept of ALM workflow, customized workflow capabilities that ALM desktop client or the traditional UI provides, we have that type of capability within the ALM web client as well, albeit it is at a much lesser scope. If you've ever done workflow in ALM desktop client and you've ever done workflow in ALM prior versions, you know that you can really, really get advanced and do some advanced scripting and tie into SDKs and APIs, and you can make ALM dance. But this particular web client has a much more simplified version of that, and we'll talk about business rules in a bit. We have a new traceability view. Again, this gives us a different look at existing relationships that we have within requirements and between requirements and defects. We have that relationship defined in ALM already. The web client gives us a view of that particular relationship. We have full version control, fully integrated with test management, and so on and so forth. This is kind of like the ALM user story, if you will. We've got the test management, application lifecycle intelligence, planning, defect tracking, all of that. We're getting a view into that world. Integration into agile user stories. So we're going to talk about the authoring capabilities of requirements and how business analysts or whoever is authoring these requirements can make use of this new enhanced editor to kind of make it much more robust and to integrate it into agile types of hierarchies and formatting, if you will, and a flexible hierarchy. We can change our views. We can look at things in different ways. We can customize workspaces, a lot of which we talked about in the prior webinar, but we're going to revisit a lot of these things as they relate to requirements and defects. So the value offer that we have is that we have full traceability throughout the application lifecycle process back to what the initial requester hoped to accomplish with software development. So we've got that traceability, we've got that ALM value, but we're providing a new way of looking at it. And it's a much lighter and much more pleasant interface for these particular roles. So let's introduce you to the authoring capability of ALM Web UI with requirements. With requirements in ALM, it includes a rich text Microsoft Word-like interface. So what it does is that it takes our formatting that we have, it takes our hierarchy, and it condenses it down into headers and subheaders and text. If you think about how we organize documents and how we have headers and subheaders and how we outline or have a table of contents for a document, it can be shown in a hierarchy format. So if you take that hierarchy format and you flatten it into a document, sort of a document format, you'll have what looks like a traditional Microsoft Word document that has headers and subheaders and text. This authoring module within the ALM Web UI gives you that capability. It gives you that traditional Microsoft Word, that traditional rich text, flat document view of your requirements, making it easier to input requirements in that format while maintaining the hierarchy structure that we know so well in ALM. And with this authoring requirements, we have the ability to actually track history and changes that we make to our ALM Web UI in the requirements module. So working with requirements is a three-phase process. It's a general process that can be tailored to your organization's needs, but generally we would define our requirements, we would manage them, and then we would track or monitor those requirements. A very generic process, again, something that can be tailored to your organization, but when you're introducing yourself to the requirements module in the ALM Web UI, this is a good place to start. So looking at this from a role-based perspective, let's start with the business analyst. Some alternate job titles that this person may have, maybe a functional architect or a product manager, or even someone who just owns the product in this particular project plan, if you will. They are responsible for creating, and essentially they represent the business. So they come in, they say, this is what the business wants. This is how we're going to, this is not how, but this is what the business wants. Here's the requirements. They are responsible for accurately defining what the business requirements are. So if you look at these three pillars here, we got define, edit, and monitor from the previous slide. The definition of our business requirements comes from this role. So in the ALM Web UI, they would define the business requirements. And they would probably send them to some people for review. There may be a board involved. There may be an approval process that goes on. The requirements would be prioritized. They would have a status associated with it optionally, or they would be assigned to releases and cycles if that organization is making use of that feature in ALM. Once they have been defined, they've been inputted into the system, they can then be detailed by going back to each one of these requirements, adding more detail, more text, attachments, workflows, technical documents if needed, and so on, comments, and all different types of things that make that requirement much more robust and easier to understand, because at the end of the day, we want a valid requirement that developers can take in and actually make into a product that is accurate. And finally, we would monitor those requirements. We would track them. We would, track their requirement coverage is what we call it in ALM. We would make sure that that requirement has been validated, has been tested against? What are the results? Are the results matching what the business needs? And we would monitor the traceability to ensure that any related requirements or any requirements that are related to our requirement is up to speed and up to par. So from a business analyst perspective, they can use our ALM Web UI product to simply come in and do their definition and their editing and their tracking. Moving along to a development perspective, a development team lead, which is usually responsible for ensuring that we meet our requirements. They're responsible for building this building that we have. They're building this bridge that the actual business wants. They want to build this software to meet the requirements. And what they do in the definition phase is that they usually break down the requirements, and they would prioritize them, assign them to a cycle if we were using releases and cycles. They would estimate development time and distribute the workload. So essentially, they take what the business wants, they break it down, and they distribute the work amongst their team. They may add some details to the requirements. They may add some comments. They may even, ask for clarification on certain things. They may even provide some screenshots and edit those requirements if needed. And they would track those requirements as well. So if a requirement changed that they were already developing and working on, a developer may want to know that, because they may want to go back and say, okay, do I have to change how I'm developing the application now that the requirement has changed? How will this change to this requirement affect how I do my development? So ultimately, the monitoring phase will give them insight into what's blocking the completion of a requirement. Is anything hindering my completion of my software development? So we want to foster collaboration is the ultimate goal. We want to bring everyone together so that we can have the most robust and the most accurate requirements. That includes customers, representatives of the business analysts, testers, developers. We want to be able to bring them together into this world, into the ALM Web UI, in order to get these requirements up to speed. That requires definition. That requires a lot of conversations, whether in an agile or in a traditional waterfall scenario. You're going to have to review, and there's going to have to be some sort of an agreement, if you will, with stakeholders and with the software development team to build this software application. And we've got the traditional ALM tools available to us to maintain integrity, to get that snapshot into the current state of the quality that makes ALM so great. So taking that to the developer and the product manager world, exactly what we're used to seeing. We want to be able to develop what the product needs in terms of requirements from a developer perspective, and we want to be able to manage the product and the scope and make sure that no risk is involved and introduced to mess up our deadline and to make our product late. So project managers come into play. They want to make sure that everything is up to speed and that we're meeting our goals, we're meeting our milestones, we're meeting our deadlines, so that we can release on time, and not only release on time, but release a quality product on time. So let's talk about using this requirements module. We've got the setup on all these different roles that are using this requirements module. When you select the requirements module from the masthead, this is what you see. And we have the option of doing different views. And views are defined as a way of looking at the requirements. These are workspaces and views that we can set up to say, hey, I want to see this in the hierarchy view, or, oh, no, I don't want to see a hierarchy view. Show me this in a flat view. I like the flat view. Just show me every requirement on its own line in a nice grid. That's how I like to look at information. We have the ability to create these workspaces and define views, and optionally, we can group our information by categories. In this screenshot, we can see here that we've got our information grouped by priority, and we also see that we have our information also broken down by author in this particular example. So in the navigation pane, we have the ability to just customize how we want to look at things. And this may vary from user to user. There may be a preference. Some users may want to have a grid view. Some users may want to see it in a tree view on the left side and, click on an item and then show it on the right side with the details. And that's me. I like to see my information. If I'm working with details, I like to see my information, my details up on the screen at all times. If I'm just perusing through the requirements or looking for a particular requirement, I like to look at things in the grid view. So having those multiple views that I can easily switch back and forth between is actually an important thing for our workflow. So the navigation pane is our traditional way of showing entities in a tree view. This is something that you may recall from ALM 11 and from previous versions of QC and so on. It mimics the traditional tree view that you may have known in ALM or in Windows Explorer. We use Windows Explorer all the time to manipulate and manage our files. Windows Explorer does a similar thing to manage files and folders. That has not changed. We will see the same type of deal here in our navigation tree in the ALM Web UI. Another thing that I actually like about this product is that we have our breadcrumbs navigation bar. Now the navigation bar shows you at the top the path of the selected item. And you can see that some of that text is highlighted in blue. That means that it can be clicked on. And if you want to navigate to a particular portion of that path, you can. But it shows you right off the bat the category item, any neighboring items that may be involved in that tree, and the lowest level item will be shown on the far right. And you can see that this particular booking system link has been clicked on, and it shows you some of the neighboring items that are in the booking system in this Mercury Tours application folder, and some of the neighboring items that we can navigate to. So this is an alternate way of navigating throughout our requirements tree. Now we can use traditional navigation bar on the left side, or we can use this nice breadcrumbs navigation bar at the top. So let's talk about defining requirements. We talked about navigation a little bit. So when we're in the definition phase, or we're at the point where we need to enter a new requirement, what we can do is that we can input information, and that information is going to require certain fields depending on what our processes say. One of the fields that is very important to ALM requirement management is requirement type. Requirement type are usually, again, user-defined later on, but early on, when you're first defining your projects in ALM, you have a set of default requirement types. And this table here shows some of the defaults that you may have in your requirements module. We got business requirement types, we got functional, we got group, we got testing, all of which can help us define what type of requirement we are defining. And again, we knew that these particular requirement types weren't going to be one size fit all for every organization out there. So you may have a need for defining a custom requirement type, and these can be inputted into the project via a customization mechanism called ALM project customization. So we can define custom project types if need be, but when we're defining a requirement, when we're creating a requirement, just know that the requirement type is an important field, and it defines what type of requirement it is. So this is how we add a new requirement. In the masthead, we select the requirements module. This is how we get to the requirements module. We decide where to add the requirement. And then step 3, we add the requirement by using one of the following options. We can select an item in the requirements tree and click Add Requirement. Okay, that's just going to add a child requirement to that selected item. Or we can select an item in the Children View grid. All right, and this will add before or add after a new requirement. So if we're looking at a requirement in a grid view, in a flat view, we can add a requirement before or after the selected requirement. Or if we're in a tree view, in our traditional hierarchy view, we can add a parent folder or add a child folder in the traditional sense of the ALM requirement management. So if you're familiar with our previous ALM products, this is very similar functionality. Not much has changed here. This is very similar to what you're used to. When you add a new requirement, this is the form you're presented with. And this form can be customized. And we're going to talk about how to customize these forms and how to move form fields around and make certain ones required and so on and so forth. So when you add a requirement, we've got our user form, we've got our name, requirement type, and I actually like this form better than I like the desktop client form. This is easier on my eyes. It's a preference that I have. Hopefully you'll have the same feedback. But this is easy to work with. And this is a traditional form. We add our required fields. You can see that our required fields have a red dot next to them. Our name and requirement type and requirement parent are the only required fields in this case. And then once we have filled in this information, we can click the add button. Once we've got our requirement added into the system, we can then edit them if we need to. And to edit a requirement, you simply have to click the requirement and go into the details and manipulate the information. This is provided you have the appropriate rights and privileges to do so. Not every user in ALM, as you probably know, has rights to go back and change requirements. For example, we don't always want software developers to go in and edit requirements. This is something that we want controlled by a certain set of individuals that represent the business. So if there's any changes that need to happen, they need to happen through this particular process. Now, if a software developer wants to get involved and get things going, then yeah, he can add a comment or something. But you definitely want to protect this. So again, in manage mode, we can make sure that a requirement is selected, and we can add the different, update the different fields, and then we click save. Now, when we go to author mode, this gives us the document view that we talked about a little bit earlier. And we can go into this requirement document view and change information as if it were a Microsoft Word document. And it's a very slick interface. This is what it looks like. What you need to do is you need to go into the author mode first by clicking the author button right under the masthead. There's a manage mode, and then there's an author mode. When you click author, it changes the look and feel of the requirements module. Okay, and when you click author, it shows you everything about that particular tree or series of requirements. Now, if you select a folder with this particular mode, you're going to get a message that, hey, we can't show you what you're trying to see because we don't have the appropriate title information, so on and so forth. What you need to do is you need to select an appropriate requirement type at the parent level in order for this feature to work. So as you can see here, we've selected the online travel booking services, and the start of this document of the requirement becomes a title. So as you can see here, the top level parent becomes the title of the document, and then all the subsequent subfolders and all the different items beneath become all the different numbered sections. So it uses some intelligence to convert this particular hierarchy into this format. And all of this information on the right is editable. These different sections are controlled so that when you click on them and you edit different things, it doesn't let you spill over into another section. It is very smart about letting you edit in each section so that you don't mismanage your requirements or that you mess up the information that's already there. Very easy to use, very intuitive. Doesn't require a lot of time to get used to. I think the hardest thing about it is to know where to start in the tree. Initially, like naturally you would want to click like Mercury Tours application and see everything underneath. Well, that's not how it works. You have to go one step beneath that so that you can have this particular title there. So when we talk about tracking requirements, it allows us to track the progress, and here we can actually see traceability. And one of the new things that was added in the ALM web view is the ability to view traceability links between entities in a different sort of view. We can also see different views and filters and focus on specific records if need be. So here it is. Here is how you would view traceability in ALM. And there's a traceability tab. I apologize, this slide is a little, that square should be around traceability. When you click traceability, you'll see here that we've got a different view of our traceability. We can see a summary, we can see trace from requirements to requirements and linked defects. And you can see these different boxes are in a specific way of showing how these are shown. So we've got requirements, defects, and test coverage here showing the different relationships between each. A very nifty way of showing existing information that we've already had within this web UI. So now let's talk about defects. Defects has traditionally been a grid view. If you've ever used our ALM QC in the past, the defects module is a grid view of the defects that are there. There generally isn't a hierarchy view. So from a web UI perspective, we generally have the same thing. We can select records, and we can edit them, and we can add new records to our defect module. From that perspective, not a whole lot has changed between the desktop client and the web client. So with the new HTML5 capabilities, we're able to view defects. We can update defect status. We have a cross-browser interface. We're compatible with the classic UI. We have a lot of the things that the classic UI has in terms of editing, managing, entering and inputting defects. And we can save and share different workspaces that we customize. It allows casual users to easily overview information, specific details for defect management and tracking. So as a software developer, I know a lot of the ones I've interfaced with in the past, and they don't want to get into the guts and all of the details of ALM. They just want to work with the entities that involve what they need to do. I just want to see the defects that I'm working on and what defects are assigned to me, and that's it. Take everything else away. You know, I've had so many developers say that. And this web client allows us to do just that. We can show developers exactly what they want, how they want to see it. So by job function, when we're working with defects, we kind of have a similar workflow to what we showed before with requirements. We have definition, we have update, and we can use the traceability to manage and monitor our defect workflow. So from a software developer perspective, we are going to be searching for similar defects before we enter any defects, and that's true for anyone using this module. They're going to search for duplicates first, and then they define and prioritize, add attachments, and assign a user if need be. If a defect needs to be edited, if there needs to be more detail added, it can go back and edit the details of that defect. This is similar to ALM 11 and prior versions as well. This particular workflow from a role-based perspective is still the same. Now from an exploratory tester perspective, what they do is that they go through the application and do their own exploratory testing, and they may need to write up a defect every now and then. So what they do is they define it, they search for a similar defect, prioritize it, add attachments, and they may assign a tester, or there may be some assignment that goes on. And again, this is like a general role-based flow of process. It may vary from organization to organization. During the editing phase, they may search for defects, detail the defects, update the status, add comments, and so forth, and monitoring, tracking, and monitoring traceability. Again, not a whole lot different. So from a testing perspective, from a development perspective, the defect module in the ALM web UI is not that much different in terms of functionality from a process role-based perspective. You're going to be doing the same things, but you're going to be presented that information in a much more user-friendly fashion. So here's a great slide showing the overview of defect definition and management. We're going to be working with different roles to manage these defects to ensure that our application is meeting the requirements needs. That's the sole purpose of what we're doing in our software development lifecycle. We're trying to ensure that our requirements are met. We want to make sure we're building what the business wants. And if there's a discrepancy as to what we're building and what the business wants, then that's a defect. And we should correct that and get all these individuals involved to ensure that quality comes out at the end of our life cycle. So to add a defect, again, it's very similar to what you've seen before, but it's a different type of view here. You click Add Defect, you select the Defects module first, of course, and then you click Add Defect, and you're presented with a form with your required fields, and you can define it that way. Updating is very similar. You would click on a record, update it. And one difference here, which you may not be used to, is that you have to click back to grid to go back to the defects module. I think in like an ALM 11, you may have a different workflow to go back to the grid or go back to the defects module. You would probably click defects on the left side to go back to the defect grid. There's an explicit back to grid link here. I'm not sure if that was even in ALM 11, but that was a workflow change for me when I started using this. Like, how do I get back to grid? There it is at the top right. So you click that link to go back to the grid if you need to work with more defects or do some other work with the module. And then you can look at the traceability by going to the traceability tab to ensure that your defects, the traceability is up to date, or you can look at what's going on with the current traceability and monitor that defect. Okay, so let's now move on to forms. Are we doing? Okay, we're doing good on time. We're going to go to forms now and talk about how to manipulate those forms I showed you. Recall the form I showed you on how to enter a requirement. When you do a new requirement, you've got that form field with all the different things in there. Or when you enter a new defect, you've got the forms for that as well. As a ALM 12 project administrator, you can design forms for use in each project. And I want to make a clear distinction. This customization is only for the web UI. The things you customize here will not carry over into the desktop client. So the desktop client is going to have its own set of customizations. So that's just a point of note for any administrators out there. If there's existing workflow or existing customizations that exist in your desktop client, these need to be migrated over or copied over into our web UI if you want those same customizations there as well. The good news is that it is very, very simple to manipulate and change these forms around. It's just a matter of clicking add new form fields and dragging and dropping the fields across the screen. It is a very, very intuitive interface, much better than the ALM desktop client interface for manipulating form fields. So again, you have a form management area, you have a design area, and a toolbar to where you can move fields back and forth, up and down, manipulate their positioning on the forms so that you can get your forms to look exactly how you want your organization to have them. One common thing that organizations like to do is put some of the required fields at the top. You want to make sure that all your required information is at the forefront. Not every organization wants that, but that's a good example of what organizations do with this type of capability. If there's a long field that requires a lot of text, as you can see, the name field is encompassing the entire width of the form. You can make a form encompass the entire size of the form. There's a size drop down here. You see here it says full. And you can change this to say, I want this to be the full width of the form, or I want it to be just half size, like these product priorities, so on and so forth. We can add different sections. We can add different delimiters and separate sections if you want to do that as well. It is very, very flexible to design these forms. So to add a new form, you click Add Form, and it will add a new form to the list. And from here, you can set a form to be the default form that individuals use. Or you can create forms that you're going to later manipulate and add during the business rule phase. The good news is that you can dynamically set the form based on multiple inputs. For example, if a user is a business analyst, I want you to show the defect form with only these fields shown. They don't need to see everything. Or if this user is a developer, I only want to see the requirement fields that this developer needs to see. So I can show, hide, move form fields around based on a role when I couple that with business rules. I can manipulate forms the same way. I can click on them, edit them, and I can add section dividers to organize fields. Again, you can see here we've got a general section, we've got a review information section that we can actually add and create these section headers and put our own custom text here to denote what goes where. All right, and again, we can also set the field to occupy half or full width of the page. So let's move on to the next part of this customization phase. It's called business rules. Business rules allow you to customize and control actions that users can perform. And in the desktop client and traditional ALM world, we call that workflow. And a clear distinction I want to make is that workflow and business rules do not mimic, or they don't have one-to-one functionality. ALM desktop client, traditional client workflow is much more robust than this business rule capability. This gives us a simplified version of it so that we can do simple policies, such as hiding fields or having status-driven defect actions to hide and show fields, or to switch different drop-down lists. Common things that you would do in the ALM desktop client world, but just keep in mind that the desktop client world and the traditional UI has much more capability behind that in the form of scripting. And you can do a lot of different things with workflow in that. We don't have that capability here. Business rules here are mainly defined by actions and conditions that are predefined in the system. So here's a general workflow when working with business rules. We plan, we define an action, we define a condition, and then we save. The planning generally comes across something that you've done before. A lot of organizations have several meetings in order to build a project template in ALM. There's a lot of rules involved, such as what developers can see, which roles can see what, and what fields should be hidden, what fields should be required, and workflow capabilities and defect status-driven workflows. A lot of that comes ahead of time in traditional ALM project planning. So if you're coming into an organization that's already on ALM and you're upgrading to ALM 11 from ALM 11 to ALM 12, you're probably going to already have this information there if you've already built a project template. If you don't have that information, you may not even need it, depending on the maturity of your organization. If you're at that maturity level where you're building project templates, then yeah, you probably should plan it out and say which use cases are going to be here. Once you've got that plan defined, you define an action, you define a condition, and then you save the changes. Now let's talk about what actions and conditions are now. Business rules, again, is in the customization settings. And from here, you can create rules and enable and disable them from the bottom bar here shown. And they are preset conditions that control field data entry. When you add a rule, there's two main tabs. The first tab at the top is called action. Then one on the right is called condition. These two work together. Actions are executed when a certain condition is met. When you first add a rule, you have the option of making the status on or off. I recommend making it off to begin with before you finish it and publish it. You want to make sure everything's perfect before you turn it on. And then you want to define what actions are here, what fields should be manipulated, and a remark to say what the rule is. And I encourage you to use this remark field to fill that in. Now, what types of actions are required or involved here? You can make a field required, you can make it optional, you can make it read-only, you can make a field editable, or you can use a different lookup list, or you can use a different form. These are the actions that can be taken. And if you've ever used workflow in the ALM desktop client, you know that you can go well beyond this. I mean, you can make it dance. You can do a lot of things in workflow. But within the world of ALM Web UI, this is the limitation. You can make fields required. And these are the most common. It's not a negative thing per se, because these are very, very common activities for this type of business rule capability. You can make a field required, optional, read-only. So you can hide fields. You can make a field required. You can force them to make it, make a field editable. You can make a field use a different drop-down list, all of which are common. Now, once you've got that defined in terms of the actions, you then need to select which entity you want to perform the action on. For example, in this screenshot, we see that we're making a field required, and we need to choose which element we want to make required. So we're going to, we're going to choose maybe we can make the comments field required if you're making a change. If the condition is that a field change or something like that, you want to make something required. Just something that you're going to make required, you need to define what that something is in the field form. Now, when you move over to the condition tab, this is where you can define the conditions for the action to take place. So you got several options here. You can select which field that you want to apply the condition to, whether it be the user's group, certain fields, whether you're in the requirements or defects module, what field you want that condition to be met, whether it be a creation date or a direct cover status or modified date, so on and so forth. You would then supply a comparison condition, whether it be greater than, less than, equal to, so on. And you can have multiple conditions with and or operations to join the two together. So this interface allows you to granularly define what conditions will make each of the actions execute and fire. So we've got about 15 minutes, so I'm going to do a really quick overview of a web client form, just so you can see that in action. I'm going to log in really quick, and I'm going to customize a defect form. So I'm logged into the ALM web client right now in the requirements module, and I can move over to the defects if need be. What you're looking at here is the requirements module in author mode, and as you can see here, if I select this header, it tells me here that it cannot be displayed because the following requirement types can be used in author mode, and we need to have this particular requirement type selected in order to use author mode. As you can see here, I've got boxes drawn around each of these sections. As I click in these and I can edit these, you can see how it lets me type in stuff here and how I can manipulate each section without affecting the previous. But it's giving me kind of this Microsoft Word-like header and text layout here. So that's a really quick overview of the author mode. So let's move on, and I'm going to go to the customization really quick and show you how to quickly create a customized form. Right now I have requirements module selected for customization. I'm going to quickly move over to defects, and I'm going to go over to forms. And you can see here that I've got a default form with these particular headers and statuses and fields set up. I've got a default with sections, and I've got one called Buana. So I'll go into this Buana one and add a section just so you can see how that looks. I'm going to add a section called Demo Section. And you can see it put that right here at the top, and I can manipulate that by dragging that down right there. So that allowed me to easily put that status, that section right there. And as you can see, I'm dragging and dropping form fields around simply by using the UI. Very intuitive. I really didn't have to, whoops, I missed the field there. I really didn't have to think about this. It's pretty much right off the bat, easy to do. And I'm going to move this demo section all the way to the bottom, and so on. And I can add different fields to this demo section. I'll just put category here. Scroll down, you can see categories here, and I can make this field category selected. I can make it size regular or full, and it encompasses the entire length of the screen. If I say full or if I say regular, it does that as well. Okay, so quickly I'm going to add a quick business rule. You can see how that works. Yes, I want to save the changes. So I've got a bunch of business rules here that are driven by defect status, and if you've ever worked with the defect module and workflow, you know that you generally want to do this. You want to be able to manipulate statuses and form fields by rules. So if I click add in a rule, I can make a certain field optional, read only. I'm going to say make a field read only. Let's say I'll make the comments field read only when the defect is closed. That'll be my action, make read only comments. Let's add a remark here, make comments read only when a defect is closed. I don't know how I came up with the scenario, but I just came up off the top of my head. And the field is going to be status, and the operator will be equal, and it's going to be closed. Done. So now when the status goes to closed on my defects, the comments field is read-only. You cannot add a comment to a closed defect. Very simple to add a business rule there, very easy. And again, there's a lot more to this in terms of how you can make it dance, but the capabilities, and I've shown you how to do some of the basics, and hopefully you can take that and apply that to whatever you need to do. Okay, ran a little bit over there, but I guess we can open it up to Q&A now.
Yeah, but why don't we have 2 questions that have come in. So I've assigned them to you.
Okay, let's scroll up and see here. As test plan and test lab are not in the web UI, can I, as a tester, have both the web UI and standard ALM client open at the same time and work in both? Absolutely, you sure can. And that is that comes across a clarification that I'm not sure of. When you talk about license consumption, I don't think it'll consume 2 licenses, but I'll have to follow up on that. But you can definitely work in both. I've actually worked that way myself, but I don't know for sure if it will consume 1 license or 2 licenses. So if you've got a limited amount of seeded licenses, that's maybe something to consider with that. But I'll have to follow up with you on that one. Thanks for that question. And can own design forms be uploaded to ALM products, e.g. when it copy products from site admin or from a project template? I do not know of a way of doing that. So the short answer would be no, but that's some feedback I can take to product management. As I think we've already received some feedback on, actually I've personally received feedback on being able to bring in and import existing workflow into business rules. And I think that kind of falls into that category of what you're saying. You want to be able to take your own design forms and bring them in from other entities and other ALM products. I have received that feedback in the past, but I definitely will resubmit that to our product team as an enhancement request and say, hey, it'd be nice if we can bring in other assets, if we can bring in other forms and other things into this new business rule. It'll save some rework of some of that information. Now, the business rules, and as you saw, was really easy to do, so it shouldn't take an enormous amount of time to do some of this. But the more work you can save, the better. So a great question, and yeah, hopefully we can get that enhancement request in. But I need to follow up with Lars on the first question about working in both. You can work in both, but I'm not sure about how licensing is handled. Okay.
Okay, Buana, another question just came in. Just assigned it to you.
Okay. Let's pop this out again. Okay. Since test plan, test lab is not web UI, how can traceability requirements and defects work? Okay. The traceability view is what we call it. And a majority of that information is read-only, sort of a view-only type of capability. But we do have the capability of adding. So we can't add test requirement traceability yet. The technology is there, but the UI isn't. We can't add test traceability to requirements and to defects, but we can add requirement defect relationships. And another question was asked in a previous session about when is that coming? When is test plan and test lab, test functionality, test stuff coming to web UI? And my answer to that question was, I've already seen beta versions of it, so it can't be too far away. I'm not sure if that direction has changed, but it is being worked on. So adding test capability to the web UI is being looked at heavily. It has been built. Like I said, I've seen beta copies of it. And yeah, I think, and the short answer would be, is that it works now, but it's going to be much more robust in the future.
Okay. That's the last question I got, Buana. So thank you very much for your presentation. For the people on the phone, if you still have questions after this presentation, I'll be posting. Oh, one other question just came in, Buana.
Okay.
Let me assign it to you.
Sure.
Oh, I only see Kanda. Maybe he's going to type something.
Yeah, let's give him I just see Kanda as well. Let's give him,
yeah.
Give him a little time to type it
Let's
in.
give him a minute. So Edgar, if you could type your question in. We'll give you a minute to type your question in. And in the meantime, I'll talk about what we can do after this presentation. So within the next hour, hour and a half, I will be posting the presentation, or at least the link to the recording and information on the presentation. And within that post, you can reply with your questions to Buana and other people regarding this presentation. You can also review the recording. Also, we have support engineers in the forums. We always have support engineers in the forums. So you also could submit any questions you have on Quality Center ALM. Just during this expert week, we have more experts in the forums, so take advantage of that and submit your questions. I am not seeing Edgar typing anything, so Edgar, I apologize. So if you could go into the forum and submit your question. Oh, he's already seeing something already there. So Edgar, if you could submit your question in the forum or send me an email, I sent out an invitation, then we will make sure that your question is answered. Again, if you have questions, go into the forums and submit your questions. Also, feedback on this session or feedback on the expert week would be very much appreciated. Buana, I want to thank you for your time today and for your presentation. We have another one in the next, I believe, in 2 hours. It's going to be our final presentation for today, so hopefully everyone will join, and hope to see you then. Have a nice day.